Okay, we are starting on Lamed, Ahmed Aleph. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 lines from the bottom. It starts B'Revi'is. Now, what we're doing here is we're really finishing up this Mishnah in which we talk about the 4 Parshias. We're about to finish it. We're going to go on to a Mishnah which talks about other matters about what we read on various Yomim Tovim. But we're finishing up this mission just to refresh where we were. We have these 4 Parshias that are read in Adar. The first being Shkalim, the second being Parshas Zachor, the third being Parshas Para, and the fourth being HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. And we have discussed the first 3, and now we're about to talk about the 4th. So that's the Revi'is. Revi'is refers to the 4th one, which is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Tana Rabbanan, we now have a brisa. Rosh Chodesh Adar, Shekal Liyos b'Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh Adar, when it falls on Shabbos, Korin Kisisa, we read Kisisa. Kisisa is essentially Parshas Shekalim. Umaftirim b'Yehoyida. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. By the way, Yohayada. There are a lot of words and names that are going to come up in this shir this morning, and people who have a better sense of the correct pronunciation, please help me out. The Ezu he Shabbos Rishona, and this is how do we determine what is the first Shabbos? So in other words, we have these 4 Parshias. The first Parsha is Parshas Shekalim, and we read it on the first of these 4 Shabbosim. And how do we determine which is the first Shabbos? The Eza he Shabbos Rishona, Kol Shekol Rosh Chodesh Adar Liyos B'Socha. Anytime that Rosh Chodesh Adar is going to fall out in the following week, we would read Parshas Shekalim on that Shabbos. The Afilu be'erev Shabbos, even on erev Shabbos. And the Afilu here is because there is a Machlekes, which we touched upon in previous days, between Rav and Shmuel about what happens on erev Shabbos. Shnia, what is it? The second week in which we read the second parsha, which is Zachor. We read Zachor or Maftirim Bekadti. The Ezehi Shabbos Shania, and how do we determine what is their second Shabbos? Kol Shekal Purim Liyos B'Socho. Any week in which Purim is going to fall during that week, the Afilu be'erev Shabbos, again be'erev Shabbos. Bishlishi, which is Parshas Para, says here, Para Aduma Umaftirim V'Zarakti Aleichem. I think this is a reference to throwing the purifying water on people who have become Tameh, and that's the connection to Para. The Ezehi Shabbos Shlishi, when do we have this third Shabbos? Kol Shesmuka Lepurim, anything that is close to Purim Me'akareha, but comes after it. Uberevi'is, and how about the 4th one, which is HaKodesh Hazeh, Umaftirim Koamar Hashem, Barishon be'ekad l'kodesh. I saw something interesting that I never realized. Apparently, there's a connection between the Daled Kosos on Pesach and these 4 Parshias. And without getting in all the to and fro, what was interesting was that if you want to drink an extra cup of wine during the Seder meal, when can you drink it? You can't drink it before the first cup, and you can't drink it after the 4th cup. You can drink it in between the first and the second cup, and the second and the third cup. But you can't interrupt between the 3rd and the 4th cup. And similarly here with these 4 Parshias, you can interrupt, meaning you can skip a week between the first and the second, and the second and the third, but not between the third and the fourth. So. Sometimes the 4 parshias are read over a 5-week period.
Second is the week of birth. Third is the week. Right after birth, how would you possibly skip?
Do you have the art scroll there? The art scroll has a chart, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, which explains how this can be done. We just turned the corner and page, and we're on the top of Lamed on the base. The Ezi Shabbos Revi'is, Kol Shekol Rosh Chodesh Nisan Liyos Besoko. We read the 4th anytime on a Shabbos in which Rosh Chodesh Nisan is going to fall during the week. Afilu be'erev Shabbos. The Chamishis. And what about the 5th? We thought there were only 4. The Chamishis Kozrin L'Kisedron. On the 5th week, we return to things the way they were, the normal Seder. And now we're going to get into a discussion about what the normal Seder means. Let's get into it and I'll explain it. The Seder Mai, what is the Seder that we return to? Rav Ami Amr, the Seder Parshios, Hu Choser. Rav Ami says we return to the Seder of the Parshios that we normally read. Now, the reason he says this is because he holds the position that when we read the 4 Parshios of Adar, we suspend the reading of the normal Parshas of Shavua. That's not what we do, but that is his opinion. So he's saying now we return and do it normal. Rav Yirmiyah Omer L'Seder Haftoros. He holds like we do things. We continue to read the normal Shabbos Parsha, and we attach or append the special Parsha that we read in Adar to it. So what he's saying is we return and we pick up with the Haftorahs, and that's exactly what we do. Haftorah who? Choizer. Amar Abaya, Kiva, I'm not sure how this is abbreviated. Kiva Sehu, is that word? How is it pronounced? Kavase, okay. No, but that's a shortening. What's the whole? You have the same Gemara I do. That's not a help.
I have a question. So these 4 portions that you stated earlier, are they read during the Haftorah?
The way that we do it now is we have our normal Shabbos reading from the Parsha, and then we attach this at the end. So instead of the other Mafter, Haftorah, this is what we read. And it wasn't always that way. And that leads to some confusion in this Gemara. Okay. Abaya is now going to agree with Rav Ami. The Rav Ami Mistavra, the Tanan Lakal Mafsikin Laroshe Kadashim. He says there are lots of instances in which we completely interrupt the normal order of reading on Shabbos to read something special. And he gives examples of it. He say we mafsikin l'rosh kadashim or Hanukkah for Purim, the Tainus ula moados, ula yom kippur. Okay. So he is agreeing. It's not what we do, but Abaya is agreeing. L'shomalam lamanda amar b'seder parshios u'choizer. In other words, the Ika Parsha B'Kol, El Lamanda Amr, the Seder HaParshio, Haftoras, Hu Kozer Haftorah B'Kol. So I'm not going to translate every word, but basically the idea here is he's explaining this discussion that Rav Ami and Rav Yirmiyahu, the different positions they're taking. Ni'ika, Idaku kati Isa, Vuhu kati Isa. I read this phrase, Ha kati Isa, Vaha kati Isa, about 100 different times to try to understand it. And if anybody can help and explain based on what your Gemara says, it seems to me that it's the equivalent to saying it is what it is and it is what it is. And I just couldn't figure it out. So I apologize. Do any of you folks online, do you have any insight on that, or how you would explain it? No.
This is what you said. Your
What is-
translation is pretty spot on.
What is,
And it says this case is as it is, and that case is as it is.
what is
So,
that supposed to mean?
Maybe one case, meaning one example is has its own rules, and the other instance has
As its rules?
its own separate rules, like respective.
All right. All right, let's move on.
They're both different.
Okay, so now the Gemara is again going to challenge Reb Yirmiyahu's view. Ubetainios, lamali hafsaka, and on fast days, in other words, why do we need an interruption of the Torah reading? Likle mitzarfas beinyana dioma. Let us read just the current, let us read what we're supposed to read in the morning. And then at the Mincha service, uva Mincha betaniosa, and in Mincha, we can read something different. Messiah Leila Rav Huna. This would support the statement of Rav Huna, the Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Mitzafra bianufia, if I'm saying that correctly. In the morning, we hold an assembly in honor of the fast day. Now the Gemara is going to describe what used to be done on a fast day. Eka Abdinan, how do we conduct ourselves on a fast day? Amar Rabbiya said, Mitzarfa lepagi diyoma, from morning until the middle of the day, minyanan, miyaninan, b'mile demasa. We get ourselves involved in the affairs of the town. I guess it means we scrutinize what went wrong in our city that called for us to have a fast day. Umapagi diyoma, lefanya rivai diyoma. And from the middle of the day until mid-afternoon, which in other words is a quarter of the day, karinan umaftire, we read from the Torah and conclude with a haftorah from the prophets. Ravi'ai diyoma ba'urakme. And so for the last quarter of the day, we ask Hashem for his mercy. Shenet Mar, now we have a long quote. Vayikru Sefer Torah, Hashem Elohehem Revi'is Hayom Revi'is Misivadim Umishtakaveh. In other words, they read from the scroll of the Torah of Hashem one quarter of the day, and another quarter of the day, they confessed and prostrated themselves. Okay. And the more questions this and says, Ve'efokana, let me reverse this whole thing. And then it says immediately, Lo salkadaitka, don't let this into your mind at all. Why? Because it's written, Diksiv, Elu ye'asfu, Kol kedu b'divrei Elohei Yisrael, Amal ha'golav ani yoshev mishumeim ad leminchas ha'arev. And around me gathered all who hastened at the word of the God of Israel concerning transgressions of the exile, while I sat stunned until the afternoon offering. Uksiv is further written, Mincha ha'erev kamti misaniosi. Okay, we're now done with that mission. We're done with talking about the four parshios. Baruch Hashem. I'm trying to.
This public fast day, is that referring to like a fast day that the court imposes on the community? Or like,
I assume that's what it's referring to, because I assume it's not talking about, we'll deal with the affairs of the city like a
Yeah.
normal thing. It
That's
must be that a fast day was declared by the Rav of that city And perhaps there's some problem in the city itself. It's
Right.
causing the problem that people need to pay attention to. I want to come back to your question. There's a huge Rashi here, which Rabbi Smith,
Yeah, right.
in his graciousness, said I could ignore. But I didn't totally ignore it. I read it and I listened to several Meforshim about it. And Rashi explains how you can end up skipping. He explains a formula. The Rashi is almost an entire page. He explains a formula. If you turn to Lamed Beis, okay, you on Lamed Beis, Avram Nassim, and look up at the top of the page. There's a start of I'm saying Lamed Amud Beis. Sorry, little Lamed Amud Beis, and look up above the Gemara. You'll see there's a start of a very long Rashi. Okay, and you'll see right above the line of the Gemara itself, there are a number of, it looks like Rosh Tevis. It says, it starts out, Kak, Zion Test Vav, Base Vav, etc. I'll give you an example of how it happens, what you were talking about. Look at Daled Daled. Okay, what Daled Daled is saying in this case is if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Wednesday, which is Daled of the week, you've already read Parsha Shekalim because Rosh Chodesh Adar comes in the next week. But if it falls on Wednesday, then that Shabbos, you don't read any of the 4 Parshias. Okay, so now we have the 4 Parshias read over a 5-week period. All right. Speak up so people can hear you.
That's week 1 and 2. 1 and 2, I understand. The question is, how are you going to skip between Parsha 2 and 3? I think I just answered the question. You're not skipping between Parsha 2 and 3. Now, how do you skip Parsha 2 and 3? Parsha 2 is the week of Purim. Parsha 3 is the week following Purim.
No, Parsha Zachor is said before Purim.
Right, the week that Purim falls out.
Said the Shabbos before Purim. So let's say you say Parsha Zachor on a Shabbos, and then Purim is the coming Thursday.
Fine.
That Shabbos, you don't read any of the 4 Parshias.
That you read Torah in the week following Purim.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So you've read
I don't have the chart.
You've read Zachor, which is the second of the 4. And then that Thursday is Purim. Okay,
2 days later, you should read Purim.
no, and that's what Rashi has come to explain. That 2 days later, you do not read Parah, you read the regular Parsha, and you skip a week.
You can read last 3 lines to the bottom of the last page. This is Parah. Even follows, which is good. Whatever close to Purim.
Oh, wow.
Very good.
But yeah,
If you look in the art scroll,
Yeah,
it actually produces a chart that shows each of the 4.
okay.
Um,
You hear,
Forms.
thank you, Joseph.
I don't
Just a
do
second.
that thing.
Avraham
I
Nassim.
can't see that.
Avraham, yes, you can. Come here, Avraham Nassim. Look,
Yeah,
look
right.
at this example here.
there.
It's right here also.
This is what no, pick it, pull up the page a little bit, Yosef.
I'll zoom in.
Okay, zoom in here. This is what we were just talking about.
I don't know why it says Parsha is part of them. Gemara says the Parsha closest to Purim. So I don't know why it gives that week off. I just don't understand. The Gemara says on the last page,
I don't know
Right
why it's
here.
Wednesday, like specifically.
oops, sorry about that. Gemara says right here, Shlishis Paraduma, Maftir, Ezu Shabbos Shlishis, what is the 3rd week? Kol Shesmuchel Purim, the one that is closest to Purim. So I don't know how you skip a week. I just don't understand it.
No,
It's
that's
okay,
the second. That's the second.
because now I realize you're not arguing with me, you're arguing with Rashi. and the
Whatever,
Gemara,
yeah, no,
So that's
yeah.
okay.
I'm not
That's okay. I can't.
Moving along.
I know what it is. I don't know necessarily how
We
we
tried.
got there. Okay, now we're on to a new Mishnah. we're done with the 4 parshias, and the subject of this Mishnah will take us all the way to the end of.
By the way, I
this-
just sent that page to the group on the WhatsApp, so everybody
Oh,
can.
Excellent, thank you. Avram Nelson says he doesn't have WhatsApp. I think we're going to decide that's his problem to work out.
Somebody will do the favor of forwarding it to him.
Okay. So now we're on Daf Lamed, Ahmed Base. We're starting with the Mishnah, which in my Gemara, it's about 4 lines up from the bottom. It's near the end of the page. And what we are going to do now is go through the Yomim Tovim and specify what is said on those days. I want to add that this was a very, very frustrating section for me to try to
Yes.
prepare,
Asher Koah,
because the Mishnah,
you're doing great.
I'm used to a Mishnah being something that is strong and we try to understand it. And we try to decide, does it apply across the board? What is its scope? What are its exceptions? What we have here is a Mishnah, which is by and large already outdated by the time the Gemara was written in Bavel. And they correcting the Mishnah with a Brisa interspersed with Gemara. And in many cases, it's not what we do anyway. So this was really, really very challenging to try to get my arms around. In addition to that, almost all of the references are shorthand references to obscure pasukim somewhere in Navi. So that's a long-winded way of saying, please help as we move along, anyone who has anything to add. Okay,
You have to accept this as a big compliment from Rabbi Smith that he get put this on his shoulders. He knows you can handle it.
Mishnah. By the way, by way of introduction, we have about 11 different parshas in the Chumash where we read about Yomim Tovim. There are 2 parshas that come up repeatedly in this discussion because they are general discussions about Yomim Tovim. One is Parshas Emor, which is in Vayikra, and the other is Parshas Re'eh. So those are going to come up again and again. The Pesach, Koring B'Parshas Moadot, Shel Toras Kohanim. This is Parshas Emor, which I just referred to. Okay. The Atzeres, what do we read? Sheva Shavuos. And I think Rashi here comes to say what that really means is Shor B'Kesev, which is what we read. For Rosh Hashanah, what do we read? B'Chodesh HaShavi'i B'Ekad L'Chodesh. B'Yom Kippur, what do we read? We read from Akrei Mos. B'Yom Tov HaRishon, which is the first day of Shel Chag, the first day of Sukkot. What do we read? Korim B'Parshas Moadot. Shebatoras Kohanim. Okay. Ubishar and Ubishar Kal Yemos HaChag, the Karbonos HaChag. And in the rest of Sukkot, we read about the Karbonos that are brought. I would add here, the reason we have this practice with respect to Sukkot is that Sukkot differs from Pesach and Kol Hamoed Pesach in the following respect. Every day is a unique set of Karbanot, and therefore we treat every day as a Chag, and that's the reason that we say whole Hallel every single day of Sukkot. Unlike Pesach, in which we only have a unique carbon on the first day and the last day. And so we don't say whole Hallel on all
No,
of
we
the
say
days
half,
of Pesach. We say half, which is a whole different story.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's, yeah. And so we're going to have special readings for each day of the Chag of Sukkos, which we don't necessarily have for Pesach. Okay. And the Hanukkah, the Nisim. And in Hanukkah, we read the Nisim. For Purim, by Yovo Amalek. That's obvious, the connection, because we have a tradition that Haman was a descendant of Amalek. Barashe Kadashim, or Barashe Kad Shechem. So in Rosh Chodesh, we read Barashe Kad Shechem. Uba Ma'amados, the Maisa Bereshis. The Ma'amados, which were the groups of Jews from around all of Israel. We've talked about them a few times. They would read from the story of creation. Okay, Ubetanios, flipping up to the top of the next page now, brachas ukalalos, and on fast days we brachas and kalalos. This is not what we read now. On fast days now we read via Kol Moshe, but then they read something different. Ein mafsikim beklalos, you don't interrupt reading the klalos. Ella ekad kore es kulam, that one person reads all of them. Okay, and now new subject. Ubisheni v'kamishi b'Shabbos, b'minka korin kasidron. And on Monday and Thursday of Shabbos, we read according to its order. By the way, these are very completely different reasons why we read Monday and Thursday versus why we read on Shabbos afternoon. The fundamental reason that's given for reading on Shabbos afternoon is that there are people who live far away and can't get to a shul during the week. So they come in to be around Jews and hear the Kriya on Shabbos, and it's read for their benefit so that they'll know what's coming in the next week's Parsha. We read on Monday and Thursday because it's a takana from Moshe Rabbeinu, and it's based on the pasuk that says, after 3 days without water, the Jews complained, and because Torah is compared to water, that 3-day period was chosen. So,
So every 3 days you would read
yeah, you shouldn't go more than 3 days
Right.
without Torah,
Yeah.
just like you can't go more than 3 days without water. Okay. So why this are put together in the Gemara this way, I don't know. The ein olam lahem mina cheshbon, and we don't use these days as part of the cheshbon calculation of what's read the following Shabbos. In other words, someone could think we read 10 Pesukim Shabbos afternoon, and then we read another 10 on Monday and another 10 on Thursday, and we start out next Shabbos subtracting the first 30 Pesukim. It's coming to say that's not what we do. And Shenat Mar, Vayidaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem, El Bnei Yisrael Mitzvasan, Shiyu Korin Kol Ekad ve'Ekad Bismano. We read what is appropriate for the day and time. In other words, Gemara. We're up to the Gemara now. Tana Rabbanim. The Pesach Korin B'Parshas Moadot. In Pesach, we read what is appropriate. Umaftirim B'Pesach Gilgal. And for the Maftir, we read Pesach Gilgal. This has to do with a battle of Yehoshua, which I think was on Pesach Sheni. Okay, and please jump in if you have footnotes or independent knowledge. The Ha'idna.
This was the
Joshua
right before
recounts the
going to
first-
land of Israel.
Say again, please.
Right before going to land of Israel, they celebrated Pesach, and they had a circumcision on Gilgal.
Uh-huh. Okay.
The footnote is
He-
Joshua recounts the first Pesach offering in Eretz Israel, brought on the altar at Gilgal immediately after their entry into the land. The Haftarah begins with a verse and concludes with a verse on Rosh, and then concludes with, and Hashem was with Joshua, thereby encompassing the verses. Maintains that the Haftarah consists of the verses and such and prevalent. I mean, it goes on and on and on, but that's basically.
So that's
Oh
the
yeah, they
connection.
had already got in the land. Sorry. Yeah.
So that's connection, that it was the first Pesach offering
in Eretz Yisrael.
in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
I think it was the first one after leaving Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
Okay. Ha'idna, we're going to come up across this word ha'idna again and again today. And what it means is nowadays. So it's saying that nowadays, meaning when the Gemara was written in Babel, it doesn't mean today, 2022. Okay. Ha'idna de'ikatre yome. Now that we're here, we're in Babel, we have 2 days of Pesach. Yom HaKama b'Pesach Gilgal. On the first day, we read what we just talked about. Ulamakar, and on the second day, b'Pesach Yishayahu. Okay. Uvashar Yamos Pesach, Malachat, we gather, and the other days of Pesach, we gather together from various places. B'kori Menyanu Shal Pesach. Mahi, what is this subject matter, these Pesukim that are gathered together? Amara Papa, Ma'apu. This is a simon of Rav Papa, and we're going to have another one that I think is of Abaya, which are supposed to help us understand what it is that we are going to be reading. I'm going to skip this because we're going to have it again in the next Samanim, which expands the number of Samanim from 4 to 8. So I'm just going to move on. Siman Yom Tova Akaron Shal Pesach, Korin Vayihi B'Shalok, which is what we just read. Umafpirin Vayidaber David. Okay. Ulamakar Kala Bakor Umaftirin Od Hayom Amar Abaya V'Ha'idna, and Abaya comes to say Ha'idna Nahuk Ama Lemikre, and now he gives, I think, 8 different Samanim. Meshach, Torah, Kadesh, Bekisva, Pesel, Midbara, Shalak, Bukra. And I made a note. I made a note of what each of these are referring to. I'll just go through it quickly. Meshach comes from Parshas Bo. Masku v'kichu lachem tzoin. You should draw and take for yourself sheep. This was referring to taking the sheep on the 10th day of Adar in the year when they were in Mitzrayim. The second one, Torah, Tav Vav Reish Aleph, refers to Shoro Kasev, Oaz, that's in Parshas Emor. The third one, Kadesh, refers to Kadesh Li Kal Bakor, which is in Parshas Bo. The first one, the fourth one, Bekisva, which is in Mishpatim, and refers to Im Kesev Talva Esami, if you or when you loan to my people. I never could come to an understanding last night about how that's relating to Pesach, but that's what that Rosh Hashanah stands for.
I didn't know they read special portions each day during the whole Pesach. I thought that was just whole night.
Well, this is nowadays back in the 4th century.
This was above.
Okay. Pasal refers to Pasal Lakha, that's in Kisisa, where we have the second set of Lukos. But Midbara is in Bahaloseka. This is by Dabar Hashem al Moshe B'Midbar Sinai. This refers to Pesach Sheni. And finally, Bukra refers to Kala Bakor, which is again in Parshas Re'eh. Batseres, Shiva Shavuos. On Seres, we read, which is, of course, what we call Shavuos. Read Shiva Shavuos. Umaftirim Bekabakuk, Akarim. Okay, and then we read Kabakuk. Akrim, and afterwards, Bechodesh Hashlishi, Umaftirim B'Merkava, and we read the story of the Merkava. Again, a lot of this is going to feel odd to us because it's not necessarily what we do.
Right. Yes.
Va'idna, and nowadays, there we go again. The Ikatrei Yoma Avdinin Kitarvehu, the Ikpa. Today, nowadays, and he says it's reversed and we do something different. I'm going to move along in the interest of getting to where we should be. For Rosh Hashanah, we read B'Chodesh Hashavi Umaftirin Haben Yakir Li Ephraim. Okay. V'yesh Omrim B'Hashem Pakad Es Sarah. And we have this custom on one day, the second day we read Hashem Pakad Es Sarah. Umaftirim B'Kana, and we ended up in the Maftir of Kana. While I was preparing for this, I came, well, I'll say it in a minute. Ha'idna, and nowadays, the Ikatrei Yomakama Ki'ish Omim Lamaker, the Ha'elohim Nasa Es Avraham, Umaftirim Ben Yakir. B'Yom Kippur, Korim Akre Mos, Umaftirin Kiko Amar, Ram Venisa, Ubamincha, Korim Be'arayos, which is in Akremos, Umaftirim Beyona. While I was doing a little outside reading to try to understand this, I came across an interesting question that I'd never thought about. Who says that we should read on Yom Kippur in the afternoon? When else do we read it? What other Yom Tov do we read in the afternoon? And two answers were given, both of which were sort of interesting. One is, well, it's a fast day. And on other fast days, we read in the afternoon also. And the other one was, I'm sorry, I forget. But it's a question in rabbinical literature. Who says we need to read on Yom Kippur in the afternoon? We make a big deal about After Yonah being the holiest reading of the year.
It's a Shabbat.
Isn't it is also considered Shabbat? That's the second.
That's it. I'm sorry. That's exactly right. Because Yom Kippur is called Shabbat Shabbason because it's compared to Shabbos. And on Shabbos, we have a reading in the afternoon. But as I said, the reading in the afternoon is for the benefit of people who aren't going to be there during the week on Shabbos. And presumably everybody's in shul on Yom Kippur. In fact, we're going to get to a discussion. We're going to get to a discussion. One of the reasons given for reading Akrei Mos, I'm not sure it's discussed here or elsewhere. Why do we read Akrei Mos? You think about it, it's an odd thing. We have so many Jews who only come to shul one day a year. And what do we read from the Torah one day a year? Don't have sexual relations with your mother-in-law. Don't have sexual relationships with that person. And I imagine people who won't come one day of the year think, what are these people talking about?
It's read on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, that's what we read. And you sit there and say, what is this about?
Yes.
And their Meforshim say the reason for it is Yom Kippur is the one day that you count on all Jews coming to shul, men and women. So the men are checking out the women as they're walking in. So they're reminded to behave themselves. And that's the reason that some Meforshim say we read Akrei Mos. It's not my pirush. I'm just telling you what I read yesterday.
Yeah.
Avraham Nassan is a little skeptical about that. Okay, going on. Amarav Yochanan, Kal Makom she'ata moitzi gevura. So any place that you mention the strength, the power, the might of Hashem, Shalach Kodesh Baruch Hu, ata moitzi anavos nuso. Am I saying that correctly?
Lost my place.
That's all right. You also mentioned the humility of Hashem. Davar zeh kasu b'Torah. This is written in the Torah. V'shinui b'nevim. V'shinui b'neviim, and there's a change with umushalosh b'ksuvim kasu b'Torah. This is about what we read. Ki Hashem Elokeichem hu Elokei Elohim v'Adonai ha'Adoni. It's giving three examples. The Kasiv Tarya. Oh, say I'm going to have to switch to the English translation here. I'm sorry. This is Lamed Aleph. All right, I'll just go on. Bekasi Besaria, Ose Mishpat, Yitom Ve'almana. When you do, it's Gevurah was mentioned, so we then mentioned that Hashem does good to widows and orphans, or in this case, orphans and widows. Shanu Benavim, Koamar, Ram Venisa, Shokenad V'Kadosh V'Goimer, Bekasi Besaria, V'Yes Daka V'Shafal Ruach, Mashalosh, Mashulash, V'Kasuim Diksiv, Solo L'Rokev Ba'arvos Bay. Could you read the translation of that, Yonatan, loud enough that everyone can hear?
Yeah, is this at the beginning of the Beresa?
Mhm.
It says, on the festival day of Sukkot, they read from the portion of the festival found in Leviticus,
Mhm.
and they read as the Haftorah the portion of.
Can you hear what he's reading?
Yeah.
Come over here, Yonatan.
Oh, yeah.
Yonatan's giving the shir now.
You guys believe it. Says on the first festival day of Sukkot, They read from the portion of the festival found in Leviticus. They read the Haftorah, the portion of, quote, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes." That's from Zechariah, which mentions the festival of Sukkot. So the Gemara comments, nowadays in Galus, when there are 2 festival days of Sukkot, on the next day, they read the same Torah portion. But what do they read for the Haftorah? They read the portion of, quote, "All the men of Israel assembles themselves to King Shlomo," which describes the event that took place on the festival of Sukkot. Are you guys?
You can stay, you can keep going.
Oh, so the Beresa continues, and on all the other days of Sukkot, they read selections from the portion of the offerings of Sukkot. It's found in Numbers. And on the last day of Chol Moed, the 8th day of assembly, they read the portion of all the firstborns, the Bachor.
Kol HaBachor.
Kol HaBachor, yeah. And it says, starting with the portion, Vayihi Kechalot Shalomo, you shall tithe, since it includes many mitzvot and statutes relating to gifts for the poor, who should be helped during this period of rejoicing, and it concludes with the halachot governing firstborns. And that's from Devarim. They then read as the Haftorah the portion of Bezota. No, it's not it. And it was so that Shlomo made an end for praying. Oh, so okay. So that quote I said before was from that Haftorah by he Kechalot Shlomo. Okay.
Where are you on the Daf now?
Yeah. Lemachar Karin Bezota Bracha.
Mhm.
It's 10 lines from the bottom.
V'hayahamor Shlomo. So on the next day, second day of the 8th day, this is still in the diaspora, they would read the portion of, and this is the bliss. This is the blessing. This is Azot Bracha, and that's, I think, the last portion until the end of the Torah. Yeah. And that's read as the Haftorah. And Shlomo stood. That's the Haftorah that's read for Azot Bracha during the 8th day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot.
Okay, so let me take over. Where exactly are you now?
Amar Rav Huna. Amar Rav.
So we're at the very bottom of the page. Amar Rav Huna.
That's a lot to take you.
Thank you. Don't go away.
Okay.
Amar Rav Huna. Rosh Chodesh Av, Shekol Liyos B'Shabbos. When Rosh Chodesh Av falls on Shabbos, Maftirin Kadshekem Moadim Sina. Minor.
What's wrong?
Hmm?
Yeah.
Amar Rav Huna.
Oh, we're still on Daf 31a. Lamed Aleph. Just gotta find our place.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Shabbos Shekol Liyos, excuse me, I apologize. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Shabbos Shekol Liyos B'Kol Shel Moed. When Shabbos falls on Kol HaMoed, Bein Pesach, Bein Sukkos, Mikra Krinan in Re'eh. Ata Afture B'Pesach, Ha'atzmos HaYeshivas B'Sukkah, B'Yom Bagog. So again, these are examples of what we read, the Torah and the Maftir. The Hanukkah, we read B'Nesim, Umaftirin, B'Neros HaZechariah, which is in Zechariah. Mikla shtei Shabbosos, Kaimeta Beneros de Zakaria. I apologize for this, everybody.
It's good.
We're still on Lamed Aleph, right? So we're up to the Hanukkah. The Hanukkah B'Nesim. On Hanukkah, we read from the passage of the tribal princes, and the Gemara adds, Umaftirim Beneros de Zechariah, and we conclude with the Torah from the lamps from the book of Zechariah. The Mikle Shtei Shabbosos, and if 2 Shabboses occur on Hanukkah, which could only occur if it's the 1st and the 8th day,
Right. Yeah.
then what do we read? And the Gemara says, Kamayasa Beneros de Zechariah. On the first Sabbath, we read the lamps from the book of Zechariah, Ubitarehu, and on the last, Beneros Shlomo. And the last we read from the lamps of Shlomo. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah, Purim. What do we read? Vayavo Amalek, Bereshe Kadashim, Bereshe Kadshechem. Okay, on Purim we read and Amalek came. On Rosh Chodesh we read and your new moons. Rosh Chodesh Shekal Liyos B'Shabbos. Okay, now the Gemara comes to say when Rosh Chodesh falls on the Sabbath, Maftirim V'Haya Midei Kodesh B'Kadshay. We conclude with the Haftorah, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another. Kol Liyos B'Ekad B'Shabbos, if Rosh Chodesh falls on a Sunday, Vayomer Lo Yehonasan Makar Kodesh. We conclude with the Haftorah, and Yonasan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon. The Gemara now adds a list of Haftorah readings for occasions that have not been mentioned earlier. Amar Rav Huna.
You're on the new Daf.
Rosh Chodesh Av Shekol Liyos B'Shabbos. When Rosh Chodesh Av falls on the Sabbath, Maftirin Kadshechem Umoadechem Sina Nafshi Hayu Alei. The Torah. We conclude with the Haftorah, your new moons and your festivals, my soul hates them, they have become a bother to me. Now the Gemara is going to comment on the above. My Hayu Alei the Torah. What is the meaning of a phrase? They have become a bother to me. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Holy One said, Lo Dayan, it's not enough. Lahem Yisrael Shekotin Lifana. If it's not enough that they sin before me, Ella Shematrikin Oti Lieda Eza Gezera Kasha Avi Alehem. But they should also bother me that I have to decide, have to think about what harsh decree I should bring upon them as punishment. Okay, now we're going back to the subject of the Haftorahs. But Tisha B'Av, Guf Yomai Maftirin, on Tisha B'Av itself, what section of the prophets do we conclude for the Haftorahs? The Gemara says, Amarav, Eka Hayisa Lezoina. We read, how has she become a harlot? Referring to the Jewish people. Not very nice to read. Mikramai, what is it that why do we read this? Or what is it that we read? The Gemara responds with a Brisa Tanya. Akarim Omin, others say, V'im lo tishmali, if you will not hearken to me, if you will not listen to me. Rabbi Nassan Bar Yosef Omer, Rabbi Yassan Bar Yosef said, An ana yina'atsuni ha'amazeh, till when will this people anger me? I read something about this, I'm going to let it pass. V'yesh omrim, ad matai le'eda hara hazos. And then we read, till when will this wicked community bother me? Amar Abaya said, Ki so ha'idna, nowadays, nahagoma lemikre, ki solid bani. Nowadays, the universal custom is to read the Torah passage, when you will beget, umaftirin asaf asifein, I will surely destroy them. And Rabbi Smith suggests we stop here, which I am going to gratefully accept his suggestion.
Wow.
Thank you very much for putting up.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.
You. I'm going to call Rabbi Smith and see if I can convince him to come online tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good day.
Good day.
It's just
That's a lot.
This drove.
Koyach, have a great day.
Thank you. Good day.